Out of shape. Good afternoon. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Tuesday, January 13th, 2026. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we are just starting our second week of this legislative session. And we're delighted to have the Secretary of the Agency of Administration, Sarah Clark, here to give us an update on what's happening with federal funds and how it's state. So, Sarah, welcome. Great to have you here. And you know Marty?
We do. Welcome back.
Yeah, familiar face. So,
Indeed.
Were you working at joint fiscal the year that, yes,
Yes.
we were allowed, the two of us were
The year
allowed
that she
together.
retired.
Yes.
And then we're happy that she's back.
Yes.
Well, I'm glad you're in your spot. So
Yes.
this is great.
All working out well. So
Yeah.
introduce yourself and let's take it away.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you, everyone. It's nice to be back with you. I'm Sarah Clark. I'm the Secretary of Administration. Here today to talk to you about federal funds. I think most specifically, some tracking that we set up in the Agency of Administration to assess adjustments to federal appropriations, primarily during the off session for the legislature. And so I thought I would could give you a little bit of context on that language and how we implemented it. For some of you, you heard it at the Joint Fiscal Committee over the summer, but for some of you, it might be a refresher, but you can tell me to speed along if you've already been kind of reminded of that language in the big bill. And so
Yeah, and so that's great, Sarah, because I think the viewing audience may not recall. And so this will be the, like, what is the governor and you get to do and what do joint fiscal and when do we get called back?
exactly,
So if you can
exactly.
On that would be great.
Yeah, perfect. So I handed out and it's also available online, but if you want the document that's like a solid green front slide. And then if you just.
I have two in case anybody didn't get one.
Perfect, extras.
We'll hand it back there.
So if you go right to the second slide, that's what gives a little bit of a reminder about what was included in Act 27 from last session, which was the big bill. In section E127.2, it created a process for how the state should be monitoring and responding to potential federal funding reductions set up based on governmental function area. So that would be natural resources, human services, transportation, so that we're not assessing every single appropriation, but like kind of big picture, major functional area, what changes could we potentially have seen over the summer and still now.
So that was sort of the 100s, the 200s, and the budget.
Exactly. Yep. And I think that the theory when it was added to the budget last year, it was building on some of our established processes for interim budget adjustments in terms of like sometimes we notify the Joint Fiscal Committee, sometimes we notify but ask for a recommendation to go to the emergency board, just kind of how we effectuate budget changes when needed off session. And so the table on this first slide lays out that reduction threshold that was established. And so if we, as we got monthly information from across state government, if we were to see a reduction of less than 0.5% or $2 million in each functional area, whichever was greater, then the Secretary of Administration would have notified the Joint Fiscal Committee and we would have prepared a plan to how we would handle that reduction. We did not trigger that at all. And then the next tranche, which was a more significant reduction, which would be greater than 0.5% and $2 million, but less than a 25% reduction or $50 million, whichever would be lower. And if we had triggered that, which we didn't, we would have had to prepare a reduction plan for the Joint Fiscal Committee, which you would have had to review, or they would have had to review and approve. And some of you would have been part of that process. And then we would have had the Joint Fiscal Committee make a recommendation to the emergency board to implement.
And the reason we did percentages and dollars is because the Department of Labor is pretty small. And 2% could be a lot or whatever, and then we have Human Services, which has all the Medicaid. And so we're trying to figure out how to do this that would appropriately trigger these responses without, creating unnecessary work.
Yeah.
In a way, right?
Yeah. My question, on each government function unit, I think last year we had a discussion, but is that any or each the right word? So how do you actually do it? So if any functional unit met that threshold, is it any?
Yes.
Yes, it is any. And I think the larger sheet I handed out to you is actually the reporting mechanism. And so you've got that to look at, and we can even walk through it if you want. So then you can kind of see like how we evaluated it. But
If it was each, then
That would be kind of all.
it'd have to be an aggregate,
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're pretty clear on it was just,
Yeah.
it's gonna be one.
Yeah.
A one.
So if you go to the next slide, it actually has the language that required the Secretary of Administration to monitor the changes in federal funding and the difference between the baseline federal funds for fiscal year 26, and how we would calculate the reduction for the unduplicated totals for each governmental function unit. So back early in the summer, before July 1st, Finance and Management on my behalf, we, issued a requirement to all our agencies and departments to submit on a monthly basis any sort of adjustments to federal funding that they had actually received. So we also are kind of constantly surveying the land to understand like what may be coming down the pipeline. But in this case, we were looking for actual federal adjustments, so a reduction primarily. And so departments and agencies on the first of every month, they respond to Finance and Management in the template that was provided to them and letting us know of what those adjustments were. And then, so we've collected 5 months of reporting, July through December, maybe that's 6 months. And we haven't yet triggered any of the thresholds in the bill. But I think what was helpful this summer coming to the Joint Fiscal Committee, and you can see on the larger report where we did identify reductions so that we could be sharing that to the Joint Fiscal Committee members and also just understanding how our funding was shifting and what some of those impacts may be.
So we didn't trigger anything that way, but at the report in July, there was a downgrade in the Agency of Transportation, and that's why they had the rescission of $7.5 million. So that was sort of separate from this process, but that was something that happened off session.
Yeah, it was a busy off session because we did have that as well as with the federal government shutdown, which wasn't necessarily like we've cut your funding, but because funding was paused, I think we took action collectively in a nonpartisan way to work with our SNAP program to make sure we took care of the neediest Vermonters during that period of shutdown, which I thought was really important work that we did together.
And I think it was complicated in some ways, but eased by the fact that we had set up these processes to begin with.
Yeah, that's right.
Sarah, do you think this was a help thing to do, having only maybe been there a year or two before, but it certainly made it easier for you to keep track of all the financial comings and goings of all these different?
Yeah, I think the structure was helpful so we could understand. And if there had been something that triggered it, that we would have had notice and been able to have that conversation in a more formal manner. This is unprecedented times, I would say, in our relations with the federal government. And so I think because of that, keeping a closer eye behooves all of us. And it's finding the balance between the right level of monitoring and communication and, allowing both the executive branch and the legislative branch to do their work.
And so did you feel that generally landed all right? I mean, it was okay?
Yeah, says the person that receives all the information,
Right.
right? So like I'm at the top of the mountain, which is helpful sometimes, but not always. And so it did put workload, but it's all things that we need to be monitoring anyway, especially during the shutdown. I think that more so than this process, the shutdown, I think was what probably put the greatest strain across state government, trying to predict what the impacts were going to be and what 1 week out would look like, what 1 month out would look like. I think that was the greatest strain.
Because you were still trying to pay for things that you weren't getting reimbursed for, or just tracking it, or what was the?
Understanding, because if you recall, we took action on the SNAP program, but we also talked about funding to some Head Start programs.
Mhm.
And they, had a pause in their funding. And these are organizations that don't have a lot of cash reserve just by the nature of how they're structured. The federal government directly funds them. And so working through like, well, how long can they last? Which they really couldn't last very long without their federal dollars. And, we put together a plan, I think, working with Joint Fiscal Committee members where we essentially agreed to grant them money as a loan during the shutdown that they would repay once they were reimbursed from the federal government. And so, which it was great because we came up with these contingency plans, and then the federal government actually did open up pretty quickly after we had resolved some of these issues or a path forward. But that was the greatest strain, was trying to understand how long we could go program by program, because not all programs are created equally in terms of how they're reimbursed from the federal government and the services that they provide.
And the timing of when they get the money. 'Cause
Yes.
They don't get it at the same time either.
Yes. Yeah.
Just as you're getting these monthly data reports and agencies here, federal government, they're not
Yeah.
about that kind of thing. You have, transportation kind of been big news summer.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a shortfall here. Did you find even at that first threshold, less than 0.5% or 2 million, did you have some areas that were close to that but didn't quite meet that threshold?
In the transportation area or just in general?
Outside of transportation.
Yeah, so-
Generally speaking.
Yeah.
Kind of watching.
We were watching, and you can, if you want to go to this larger sheet, though, I acknowledge it's a little hard to read.
It's on here. We'll get to it. Yeah.
But I think the area,
So did we do the back?
and so the back one, yeah, why don't, let's get into that, your question.
Thank you.
And so the back one is just a reminder, the budget included contingent appropriations for the end of fiscal year 25 that ended up all being in the money, if you will, and that the general fund allowed for us to fully fund these three areas, which is 50 million to the Agency of Administration, that if we experience a reduction in federal funds, this is the money that we would have used via the e-board to, fill that shortfall in federal funding. It's what we used for the SNAP program, which was
There's 43.5 million left, I believe.
exactly. Then the second $30 million you see on this sheet is reserved in the general fund for future appropriation by the General Assembly for federal funding shortfalls. And then the last 30 million also reserved in the general fund is to address federal funding shortfalls, Vermont Medicaid or other human services needs, property tax relief, housing initiatives. It is a more broad use of things that we could contemplate using that for.
So the only thing we used out of that 110 million was a 6.5.
Yep. Yeah,
So money left.
we do. Yeah. We're all actively monitoring, right? It's January 13th. January 30th, we will run into some federal appropriation challenges again in different areas. But I think once we get through the budget on my end, we'll be delivering our budget next Tuesday. And then I think focusing on what's going to happen at the federal level will be a top priority to the extent we can't necessarily control it, but understanding what to expect. Right.
And we'll have had the e-board and the revenue forecast update this. week.
Exactly.
A lot is happening.
A lot going on in the next, couple of days and weeks. So,
Okay, so now we'll go to the,
great. So I apologize if it's hard to read. My eyesight definitely has not improved as I've aged. So the top sheet is a kind of a cover sheet, if you will, a summary. The column all the way over on the left lists the functional areas of government. So to the chair's point, that's like the B100, B200, et cetera. It gives you, as you move across the columns on the page, it gives you the unduplicated total amount of appropriation in that functional area. And then it calculates for you what a 0.5% would be of the federal appropriation and what and then the $2 million. So it'll tell you which is higher, right? In each of those areas. To the chair's point, like sometimes, 2 million in the Agency of Human Services is not significant, but it would be in the other functional areas. So that's why that 0.5% is helpful. And then, so the blue is like the kind of smaller level of change that I talked about. And then moving across the page with the green shaded area, that's the 25% or $50 million, whichever is lower. And so it gives you those thresholds by functional area. And then the second to the last column where it says revenue reductions, revenue redux, that's where we were able to quantify actual cuts to budgets in those functional areas. And so you can see that was in human services, it was in protection, labor, and natural resources. And then the column all the way over on the right is simply yes or no, did it hit the threshold? And it did not. So that gives you a quick glimpse of the thresholds and what we saw and we have seen through December. Because again, we haven't had any action, any updates to this report since the November Joint Fiscal Committee meeting. And we receive the reporting on a monthly basis and there's been nothing that's triggered a reduction. Yep.
So the details,
Yeah, so the next couple of pages, and again, this is very hard to read, so it gives you the nature of what those reductions were by specific section of the budget. So you'll see the first one, section 224, which is agriculture, agriculture development. They received a reduction actually in March of 2025. So when you were in session, but it is the local food purchase assistance cooperative agreement was terminated early. And this is the resulting funding that was reduced from their federal budget that would have been used to support food purchases in underserved areas for underserved community members. I think, and some of this is, like, if you recall back to that time, late spring, it was in the news, some of these program reductions. So
it was the
this is
first
quantifying that.
So that's why, yeah.
Yeah. Then the next one is in the Secretary of State, Section B 232. This was a reduction in their base funding for the Help America Vote Act, HAVA, election security. It went from $1 million in the base to $272,000 roughly in the base. So a reduction overall of a little more than $700,000. And then do you want me to run through all of these at a high level? Sure.
They all are, yeah.
So the next is section B 233, which is in the Public Service Department, Regulation and Energy, which is the loss of Solar for All award.
Oh, yeah.
All that was a much larger award of $62 million. These funds of about $400,000 were going to be for limited service positions that were not filled. And so no impact on the ground in terms of having to do a reduction in force for filled positions, but that's what that $400,000 would have done.
And the 62 million that was canceled basically wasn't in our state budget, so it didn't trigger any of the pieces of the budget.
Yeah, that's a great point, because this is off of what was in the 26 base federal funding, and so there are sometimes pieces outside of that. So
Grant that we didn't get.
So the next there's a big chunk of the Agency of Human Services. This first one, and you may recall this from Budget Adjustment Act, is there was reductions related to the Planned Parenthood of Northern New England and Medicaid funds. And so that was roughly a $1.1 million general fund impact that you actually are seeing in the budget adjustment request using state funds. The next two are both in the Department of Health, and they involve 3 of the same grants that were reduced by the federal government, but they're in 2 different appropriations. That's why I've kind of grayed off around those 2. And so these were grants that were also canceled in March of 2025. Health Disparities Grant, which involved the cancellation of some recipient grants and 2 staff reduction in force. Also, the Environmental Justice Program grant, again, cancellation of subrecipient grants, and the Immunization COVID Supplement grant. So the grant was not extended in the case of the COVID Supplement grant, which is the largest share, about $4 million of this combined reduction. And so it was not extended, and it impacted subrecipient grants. And there were some positions that were eliminated, but through attrition. In the Department of Mental Health, the reduction here is a cancellation of an American Rescue Plan Act mental health block grant for about $750,000. These funds supported youth with serious emotional disturbance and adults with serious mental illness. It was a one-time grant that was scheduled to end at the end of September of 2025. And so this was an early termination.
And so if we had spent more before then, they would have only clawed back what we hadn't even spent.
Yeah, I believe that's the case.
And that was in what month? That was in March.
March.
So 6 months early.
Yeah.
Okay.
Moving down the list in the Department for Children and Families, the Office of Economic Opportunity. This you also probably read about in the news, the SNAP Nutrition Education and Obesity Prevention Program, SNAP Ed. It was, let's see, it was ended, I don't think it was ended early, but the program would have provided nutrition education and physical fitness for SNAP eligible households. And so this is what the estimated impact in state fiscal year 26 was, $347,000.
And right, because the fiscal years are different. So we got some of it for last fiscal.
Exactly.
And I am assuming that work, because a lot of it, or most of it was contracted out, is not picked up by any other department or agency. I mean, it was for a very specific purpose, right? And
Yeah, I know DCF worked with the health department on it. I didn't hear as part of this process that the work was being picked up anywhere else, but I want to confirm before I.
Yeah.
So moving out of the Agency of Human Services, the Department of Labor had a unemployment equity grant program from the federal government that was terminated early, leaving $900,000 unspent. I think the positive news is that the work was 90% complete, and they were able to finish it using language access plan dollars that we were actually appropriated to the Office of Racial Equity a couple of years ago for this same type of work. And so they were able to complete the work using those state dollars that were set aside for language access planning.
I remember that we had money for language access.
Yeah, we had a couple $1 million that they're still working to deploy across state government. So. And then the last one, which I think came closest to your question, came closest to triggering the threshold, was in the Agency of Natural Resources, Environmental Conservation, Office of Water Programs, which this is the rescission of the Technical Assistance Fund for the USDA NRCS Regional Conservation Partnership Program. The funds were going to be used for contracts to provide technical assistance to farmers and forest landowners for water quality practice implementation. So these funds for the technical assistance were cut. I think the larger impact that you don't see here is that there were going to be funds direct to the farmers and the forest landowners that were also cut. And so these were just the technical assistance funds that would have helped them implementing the grants that were cut. So this is like, we got really close to $2 million on this one.
Yes, you did.
Yeah.
Goodness.
We did. So,
That's curious about.
yeah,
So the total for all of these is just over 12 million.
that's correct.
Yes.
That's through December. And so
Yes, it could have been worse, but it's
it could have been worse, but
still impacts people.
it does. And, we are still watching, I'm sure, as we've already discussed, coming to the end of January, what's going to happen with federal appropriations bills. And, we're still watching programs across state government. We've got some watching closely in the Department of Labor and our workforce programs funding that will likely run out in February. In the emergency management area, they're waiting on some emergency management funds to be released from FEMA.
The whole FEMA thing is another, worry.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I think in the Agency of Human Services, HUD funds and the housing, I think you've got some testimony later today about Section 8 vouchers, as well as in the childcare arena. So we're watching closely. I think, as you've heard, it's not always all bad news which is good. Vermont was a pretty successful in the competitive process for the rural health transformation grants, and that we got $195 million to spend in the next year, which is a lot of money. And I think we were very successful in the context of our neighboring states in New England and when you look across the country. So
I look forward to just having the money in hand.
yes.
I know they have to get back. They came in last week and, they have to get back with a full budget and then it gets to get approved finally.
Yeah. Yeah,
Not counting our chickens quite yet, but looking forward to doing that.
yes, that's right. So
Great. Any other questions for Sarah? Thanks for,
Just for clarification. So this triggering mechanism that we put in the budget last year, in the budget that we're in right now,
yeah,
will continue until we get to the end of the fiscal year. And you will continue to do the monitoring in
Yeah.
case we hit these triggers.
continue to do the reporting, but I think it wouldn't be, I don't know that we would necessarily go to the joint fiscal committee because we'd be in session. I think we'd, probably come to the appropriations committees as opposed to the joint fiscal committee.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Primarily done for the off session.
For the off session.
To give the authority. But I think the General Assembly would be involved.
Yes.
For sure. Yeah.
So we need to put this language in coming year's budget.
In FY 27?
Does
Yeah.
the language stand from year to year? Do we need to put that language back in?
Well, this isn't about having money. This is not a contingency thing. This is a trigger thing.
trigger.
So yes, we may need to.
We may want
Because
to.
there's a bunch of things that don't happen until next fiscal year, including some things happen in September and some things happen in January. And so, but we've now set up a framework for doing that.
Yeah.
So we can, that may be something that we do, but it's something that we should definitely look at, but we'll see where we land.
Yeah.
Just shouldn't forget about it.
That's right. I'm counting on you, Lee. Dave?
This is in regards to the 195 million grant and the requirement to spend it within a year. Would you know, and we can ask the team if it, but does the federal government say, Jill, for instance, said there's 40 different projects we want to fund, and I imagine they're all going to be a grant or a contract, which can take time.
Yeah.
Understandably, through state government to get it out the door.
Yeah.
Do the feds look at when you get it out the door, or do they look and say, when did the vendors spend it?
I don't know the answer to that. I haven't seen the actual terms of the grant, so I think I would want to defer to AHS.
That could get a little dicey.
Yeah.
I think they told us that the date started the day they got the award announcement.
Right.
But that's already, we're gonna lose
Yeah.
at least a month, so hopefully they're
Right.
doing their thing.
And
But if
I'm
that's
just wondering,
worrisome, if that's the case.
right, I understand when the clock starts, but
Right.
measuring, did you spend it or not? Could be, I'm trying to think with ARPA, I think it was just when we got it out the door,
The date,
or was it when you
Obligated,
spent
it had
it?
to be obligated by December of 24 and it had to be totally spent by December of 26. So if they had a grant or contract by last December, they were okay. And then they had 2 years to finish it up.
Could you let me know?
Yeah, I will follow up because I need to know as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're obviously working with the Agency of Human Services to do whatever we can do to expedite, because that's
I'm guessing the Joint Fiscal Committee has to accept the grant.
correct.
We will be having a meeting, but I think we can't have the meeting until the last 2 pieces of the back and forth on the budget have been, so we aren't gonna do that this month. But it'll happen sometime this spring.
Yeah, can you explain, having done this monitoring? What would the time commitment be, or what's the obligation for the administration and all the different agencies? What's the time crunch for them if we continue this beyond just this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is like, there is definitely a resource constraint and a resource pull for all the agencies and departments to do this work. I don't know like exactly, it probably depends on the complexity of your federal program, like certainly a place like the Agency of Human Services with multiple funding programs that could be impacted. They also have resources in their business office, more so than maybe like the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, which would have fewer resources to do it. So it'll really vary I think it depends on the environment that we'll be operating in on a federal level. And as we get closer to the finalizing the budget, I would welcome the opportunity to think with this committee about what would make the most sense on an ongoing basis to maybe minimize the resource, but also meet the need of understanding shifts in our federal funding. Because as you know, federal funding shifts all the time, right? It's a normal course of operating state government going back for decades, right? I think we're just operating in a different environment now with the federal government that, we have to be measured in our evaluation of what they say. And understanding actual cuts, not just the threat of cuts. And so.
And it's unpredictable, so that's just the added. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Sarah, thanks a lot for coming.
Good to see everybody.
Again.
Yes, you will.
It is out. And we'll chat again later. Great. Thank you. Committee, we're going to switch gears completely and go to S60. And Mike O'Grady is here from, is anybody from the committee here too? Yes, we don't. Yeah. Printed off this printer in here?
No,
Okay.
it has been.
It has been fixed. Well, I'll send something to print.
It's actually so much cleaner.
Oh, is it? Oh, that is a beautiful thing. So committee, you'll remember that we talked about S60 when we were here in December, and we asked Michael Grady to do an amendment for us. So we're not going to go over the entire bill again because we already did that. We want to chat about the amendment. So good afternoon, Mike. Well,
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. In front of you, as the chair noted, you will have an amendment with the draft number 2.1, the date of 12/23/25 and a timestamp of 2:20 p.m. This amendment does 4 things that you requested in December. You requested that the term climate or climate change be replaced to avoid any controversy that might cause. You asked for technical changes because remember last year you codified the Vermonters Feeding Vermonters program in the same subchapter and sections that this would have gone into. So you have to move these sections to another subchapter and sections. You also agreed to implement or include Representative Groening's amendment regarding material that was supplied or information supplied during the application process.
mhm.
And then you wanted a contingency clause for if there are no appropriations, and the Secretary of Agriculture will be responsible for implementing the program. You also asked that we, as an office, come up with default contingency language. Bryn worked with JFO to come up with the language that's in the draft. If you don't like it or you want changes, it would be helpful to know so that we can refine and get it out to our staff.
Great. So let's take this in order. I know the number changes in the middle I'm not too worried about, but I had
Yes.
had a quick email. And so if you want to just kind of walk through the language changes, the first instance of amendment, which there's a couple in there. Yeah.
Yep. So in the first instance of amendment, you're amending the findings clause, and there are several references to climate or climate change in the findings. In the first instance of amendment in subdivision 1 of section 1 of the underlying bill, it had previously said Vermont experienced extreme flooding and other climate fueled disasters, and you replaced climate fueled with weather-based. Similarly, in the findings in subdivision 4A, where there was a reference to the state should establish a permanent funding support program to maintain the viability of farms and forestry operations in order to ensure food security, climate resilience, and rural economic vitality. You struck the term climate resilience.
Could we just say resilience? Resilience is an issue. I don't know if that's whether we can just do the word resilience. I mean, I'm just thinking of all the flooding and that we're trying to build resilience into the things that we're doing regardless. So I'm wondering does that even make sense if we just use the word resilience, or is that mean something else?
I think that's fine. I think the term resilience has become so part of emergency response and emergency planning that people will understand what it
Yeah.
means.
Or would the committee be all right with that if we just?
And just, maybe, I don't know whether it would, but operational resilience, because I see that the next line down, you talk about operations impacted by. Am I on track?
I don't know if
Just not.
this resilience is just operational resilience, because there's planning resilience that's involved in too.
I think I'd try to leave it broad.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so if we can just make the word, just strike out the word climate and keep resilience.
Okay.
Okay.
And then in subdivision 4C, again, in section 1, in the findings, it had previously said, provide a source of relief funds permanently available to farmers and forestry operations impacted by climate emergencies and extreme weather. This is something the chair pointed out to me in a email earlier. I had replaced climate emergencies with weather-based emergencies, and the chair pointed out, what's the difference between weather-based emergencies and extreme weather? And I admit it's duplicative.
Right, so do we say weather-based emergency?
That's what I was
I think
thinking.
that's clearer. Okay. At least if we're gonna make you do another amendment, there's two things to change.
Okay. So the second instance of amendment and several of the subsequent instances of amendment make those technical changes in order to move these sections into the appropriate subchapter and section numbers. That first one, second instance of amendment, changes the subchapter heading for the Farm and Forestry Operations Security Special Fund to subchapter 5 of chapter 207 of Title 6. The third instance of amendment in the definitions under that new subchapter, it's changing the section number from 4631 to 4641. In one of the definitions in the bill, specifically the Farm and Forestry Operations Security Special Fund Review Board, there is a cross-reference to the actual creation of that board in 4634. That number 4634 is being changed to 4644. The fifth instance of amendment is changing the creation of the Farm and Forestry Operations Security Special Fund from 4632 to 4642. Sixth instance of amendment in the actual payments from the fund changes the section number from 4633 to 4643. And then in that new 4643 in subsection B, this is where Representative Breining's amendment would be incorporated in the information that the secretary shall develop a streamlined application for awards under this section that shall include the application shall include a list of any state grants or loans received for the purposes of the farm or forestry operation business in the past 5 years, to include amount, source, and purposes of the funding received.
That was the new, that was the only part that we put in there. Yeah.
And then, should I move on?
Yes.
In the seventh instance of amendment, we're back to changing the section numbers in section 4634, which had been the creation of the Special Fund Review Board, changing that number to 4634 to 4644. And in that new 4644, in the creation of the members, or specifically the terms of the members, there were some incorrect cross-references. That first subdivision B3 that is cross-referenced, that if you look at the text of the amendment as it exists today, subdivision B3 would be the state recovery officer. The state recovery officer is ex officio. You don't want that person to have a staggered term. So it really was supposed to be referencing subdivision B4, which are representatives of agricultural organizations. And similarly, on the next page of the amendment, the reference to subdivision B5, that's supposed to be referenced to farmers, and then the reference to subdivision B5 in the House Ag report is supposed to be subdivision B6, which were the new forestry operators that were added to the board. And then the ninth instance of amendment is the contingency for funding. So the duty to implement Section 2 of this Act, Farm and Forestry Operations Security Special Fund, is contingent upon an appropriation of funds in fiscal year 2027 from the general fund to the Agency of Agriculture for the specific purposes described in Section 2 of this Act.
So just to be clear on this, Section 2 is the creation of the special fund. And if we don't appropriate any money, there is no special fund created, or could we create the special fund and not fund it?
So you could say, instead of it saying, well, it says special fund because that's the title of the subchapter.
Right.
So it's really the entire program that would not be implemented.
So does the bill become moot?
That's effectively what the contingents do. This will be codified, right? If it's enacted,
No.
signed by the governor, it will go into the green books, but the Secretary of Ag will have no duty to implement the program if there are no appropriations.
What if we are able to appropriate money for FY 28, not FY 27?
Well, the program will be, that's a good point. So I think the language could say it's contingent upon appropriation of funds in fiscal year 27 or subsequent fiscal years
Yes.
from the general fund.
I think that would be better.
It's a better safeguard. for
Yeah.
Well, right now, if you leave it at 2027, there's no option to go forward unless you.
Right. Then you start all over again. I don't think that's the intent.
It's a good catch.
Is there, this has changed names. Do we need to account for that?
So that's in the underlying report of the Committee on Agriculture. The name of the bill, is that what you're referencing? Yeah, so that's still there. You're just amending their report. Their report will go through. And it will say, and that after passage, the title of the bill be amended to read an act relating to establishing farm and forestry operations security special fund to provide payments for farm losses due to weather conditions.
We want to say farm and forestry losses, or is that?
It does say that.
uh,
Where in the retitled?
On the effective date? Provide
Oh,
payments for farm. The version I have says farm losses.
Oh, you're.
Where are we?
Oh, would be the
I'm looking at
last-
section 3, effective date.
Looking at side by side.
I think you're looking at the side by side.
I am. I'm looking at the
So
side by
the
side.
bill, the bill says shall be entitled to read an act relating to farm and forestry operations security special fund. Oh.
Or farm
For
losses.
farm losses. Yeah, that should be changed.
Okay, understood.
All right, you found another thing to amend. Good job, Marty.
Okay,
So now we have a few things to amend. Which is
you
great.
do have one last change. It's the 10th Amendment, changing the effective date from 2025.
Right, 2026, which makes sense. Any other questions for Mike? Is this all making sense, what we're gonna do? So Tom?
Yeah, just, I'm sorry, I came in a little bit late. So just to be clear, most of these are technical changes, not all, but there's a lot of the technical changes in the 10 instances, but the grading, what was the grading amendment is being inserted into our amendment.
Yes,
Yes.
He's amendment is just basically verbatim section,
Yeah.
which is really number 3, item 3 of the 5. And we made another couple little changes in the front, which I'll check, and I'll let you know
Yep.
those are minor, but I think, are we all good with what we think is gonna come next?
I mean, I can summarize.
Yeah.
With the amendments, you, instead of it saying striking out climate resilience entirely, you're just going to strike out the climate before resilience. Or that preference where it was going to say weather-based emergencies or extreme weather, you're just going to have weather-based emergencies.
Right.
Or on page 3 of the amendment, in the contingency fund, it will say in year 2027 or subsequent fiscal years.
Right.
And then in the retitling of the bill, it'll say to provide payments for farm or forestry operation losses due to weather conditions.
Ready? Got that? Okay. So I think we'll want to see it and then we can vote on it. We are going to take a break. We're going to hear about Section 8 housing and if you want to come back.
Sure.
Around 4:00, we're now.
Yeah, that's good.
Reporting for a minute
No,
maybe,
that's
but,
okay.
and then we can vote it out. Our clerk is not here today, so somebody else is going to have to be the clerk today. But we'll, figure that out.
Okay.
So thank you very much. Mike. I appreciate it. So committee, we're a few minutes early. Why don't we take? Hang on. We have a bit of a break. Wonder if Agency of Natural Resources can come in a few minutes earlier. Let's break for 10 minutes and then we'll check and see if